everyone. My name is Melody Jones-Poynton.
And I'm the Reverend Thomas de Vermouth.
And we are excited to walk the Sunrise Road together today.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a podcast with conversations that connect and weave hope into the fabric of our shared lives.
Thank you for joining us, and here's this week's conversation.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Sunrise Road podcast. I'm very, very excited to have today with us my good friend Barbara Stankowski. And Barbara and I, we go way, way back until high school and IFES small group. And and Barbara has been a minister pastor in the Swiss Protestant Church and is joining us now from a complete different part of the world, from a different time zone, actually today, on a different day, joining us today. And so we're very excited to have you here, Barbara. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited too. Hi.
Why don't you start off telling us a little bit about you and who you are and what you're doing and how you came about doing that?
So I'm actually now in the Philippines, in Manila, but I'm originally Swiss and I'm a Swiss pastor, as you said, and I worked for 10 years in a church in a very rural part of Switzerland. And then my husband, Simon, and we decided to move to Manila, which was a big change. And together with our two sons, it was in 2018, so 5 years ago. And Noel, our older son, was 5, and Mika, the younger one, he was 3. And since then, we live here in Manila, and we live in an urban poor community north of Manila. With Christians, a very small Christian organization called Servants to Asia's Urban Poor. And what we are doing is just living in urban poor communities and sharing life and try to be part of what God wants us to do. We long that the situation of our friends here will become better, that the kingdom of God will be visible here, and that there will be more justice in our communities. So it's quite simple. We just live here and share life.
It's quite simple. I don't know. How did you get about? How did that decision to make that move come about? What was behind that? What's the
It's a long story. It's a long story. To make it short, I grew up with some stories from missionaries in Asia, and even when I was very, very young, maybe 4 years old, I remember that I was so sure that I will end up in Asia as a missionary in the jungle, so really rural. That this was my plan, and I was sure it's God's plan. So when I think it was after bachelor, I took a break from university and I went to Thailand, to the jungle, to the place of these stories to find out if this is real and if God really calls me to the jungle. And I was so excited to be there. I loved it. But it was obvious that I need a husband. I can't do this as a single woman. I can't live in the jungle. So I came back from Thailand and I met my husband. And he was very much into Asia too, so this sounds great. But he was talking about the Philippines because he spent some months here in Manila with servants. And he was talking about Asia, like one part of Asia, I had no idea about it. He spent some months as an intern in Manila with poor people in poor families. And it sounds so crazy to me that you can choose to live in a slum, because why should you move into a slum area? Why should you move into a hot city with 15 million people in small houses and all this poverty if you can choose to go to the jungle? Why should you do that? And it really made no sense to me. But there's no other explanation. I think more and more God broke my heart for the poor. I had no idea about urban poor, the whole topic. I did not even know that how many people all over the world are living in cities, in poor communities, in urban poor communities, and it's getting more and more. I mean, majority of the people today are living in cities, and many of them are poor. And the founder of Servants, he said, hey, so many people are living in urban poor communities, and where are the missionaries? I mean, missionaries just live outside somewhere. We have to move there. We have to share life with the poor if we want to change something and if we want to share the gospel. So he moved into a slum in Manila, and that's what Servants doing until today. So yeah, more and more it made sense to me. And then it was in 2011, my husband and I, we came to Manila for a short internship to find out if this could be something for us. As living in a slum is not for everyone, of course. So you have to try it out. And I was a bit surprised about myself. I realized, oh yeah, that's good. It feels good. I think I could do this. But we both had kind of the sense of not yet. This is a bit confusing. So we both said, yes, that's something for us, but not yet. It was too early. I just started working in my church in Switzerland. And we both thought maybe it's better to start a family in Switzerland. So we stayed. We had our first boy, then our second boy. And as they grew, it was always kind of, we were always talking like, yeah, once when we will go to the Philippines, it was like, for example, when the boys love to eat rice, we said, oh, that's great, because when we will live in the Philippines, they're already used. Or when we were talking about holidays, we said, yeah, we don't have to go to the beach because there will be lots of beaches in the Philippines. So it was more about joking, but it was always kind of in the air. And when our older son was 3 or 4, it was obvious that even we now have to choose. Either we go or we don't, because then the boys are too old. So in 2016 or so, we decided to think about it and pray about it and talk about it again seriously. Do we go to the Philippines or not? And I was, as a 6 in an Enneagram, I was so sure that we will end up to say no, of course not, because that's just too crazy to move in a slum, in an urban poor community in Manila with 2 young boys. That's just too crazy. But yeah, I mean, after lots of prayer and talking, and so there was a huge peace about going to Manila and moving into a slum. And that's what we did in 2018. Yeah. We are very thankful that we had no idea about COVID and pandemic.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Seriously. Yeah.
So, and then we moved to Manila. So, and now we still live in the same house. Because of the pandemic, it was not possible to change community. So we stayed here, which is great. We live in a kind of small house. I mean, very small compared to how Swiss people live. It's compared to our Filipino neighbors, it's a very big house for just one family. We have a small living room and a small bedroom, small kitchen, and an own bathroom, which is great. Yeah.
I wonder, Barbara, as you're talking, I'm trying to envision what you mean by urban poor and what you mean by slum. And because I have some images that come to mind, but I don't want to assume that those are correct.
Yeah.
Because they've been placed there by the media, probably, So can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by urban poor and by slum?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there are lots of different definitions about poverty. I mean, you can say you're poor when you have less than $1 or $2 a day. That's about poverty. Or I mean, when are you poor? That's a good question. I mean, we are talking about poor communities. You see them everywhere in Asia, especially now in Manila. These are often in between some nice subdivisions. You have just informal people living there in small houses, often with no, like they don't have rights. They just settle down there and build their small houses. And it's so, you cannot say this is a slum. That's how a slum looks like. It's just often small houses, some built of concrete, some built of just wood, and that's done really bad with just some paper things. Like, yeah. So there is many different phases of poverty. Our area, and there are like, and then of course we all have pictures in mind, like from the very, very poor areas, people just living, like for example, along railways or along rivers or the sea, and that's extreme poverty often. Our community is a bit less poor, or it's more diverse maybe. So if you walk through our community, you have very nice buildings and also high buildings, and then you think, oh, is this still a poor community? But if you know a little bit the area and you go, for example, there are 2 quite good houses and a very small alley, and you just pass the alley, and then you're suddenly in a small compound with very, very poor people, like people without own bathroom or without running water, but you don't see them. Maybe you don't see them just from the street. You have to get closer, and you have to get to know the people a little bit better to find the poor or to see the poor. So poverty is kind of all over. It's just a question if we see it. Yeah. And we live in a little bit a better neighborhood in a way that it's not, our house is made by concrete, for example. And this was important because our organization knew if we move in a too simple house, that's not sustainable for a family with 2 kids. So we needed to be in a safe, kind of safe house with no floods, for example. If you have floods all the time with a family, that's really exhausting.
Yeah. Or the water. Yeah, you have water, I assume. Yeah.
Can
you do have water?
Yeah, we have water. Yeah. So we have very, very poor neighbors. So families that have, especially during the pandemic, they had no idea what to eat, or it just was enough for the kids. I mean, enough. It was not very healthy, but it was something to eat for the kids, often not enough for the parents. Lots of people have just money just for the day. And if something happens, then it's really a problem, and they have to find money. They often lend money. Borrow. To lend money. And then if you are so much under pressure because you need it immediately, then you lend money somewhere with terrible conditions. Like we have very common system is 5 to 6. So you give me 5,000 and I have to give you back next week 6,000, which is terrible. So, and then it's going on. Then you have this cycle of poverty. Yeah. So I would say we live in a community where lots of people have just enough, but only until something happens. And then it's not enough anymore. And that's so, so stressful. Before we came here, I had no idea about how stressful poverty is. And I think that's the same also in Western countries. If you don't have enough money, or if you know it's not enough for tomorrow or for next week, that's you just live in such unhealthy, stressful situation, which is not good. And it's
So you live in this community, and I think one of the questions that I have, and I told you before we started that you're legendary in these parts, and it's because you have been worshiping with us, and often even through the pandemic. And I gave you a shout out. I was so excited when I saw you on Christmas Eve, and I was like, Barbara is worshiping with us, because the time zones worked out, and it was just so great. I would love for you to come and visit us in Lincoln, Nebraska. But one of the things I think is, and I'm just gonna be honest, something that I struggle with is we call them mission co-workers in the Presbyterian Church of USA, PCUSA. But do you consider yourself a missionary? And what is a missionary? And how do we define what is mission? How do we define mission? So what are you doing there, I guess?
So I think all of us in servants, we have a team in India, we have a team in Cambodia, one in Indonesia, and we in the Philippines. And I think we all hesitate to call ourselves missionaries, because if we say, I mean, in the Philippines, it's no problem to say I'm a missionary, because it's a very Catholic country, and there are so many missionaries first from Spain, and then from America, and from Korea also. So that means people have a picture in mind what missionaries are, and we try to do something else. So we really avoid to say we are missionaries. I even avoid to say I'm a pastor. Most of the people don't know that I'm a pastor. So what we just want to share life. We want to be friends and neighbors. That's first of all. And that's we don't say, especially in the first years, we say, but until now, we are not missionaries, we are learners. We move into a community, and first of all, we have to learn, because we have no idea. We don't know the language, we don't know the culture, we don't know about life. I mean, where do you go and buy your things? And what about laundry? Because, I mean, when we don't have a washing machine, and I really had no idea about hand washing. I mean, of course, in holidays, on camping site, but to do laundry for a whole family all the time, I had no idea how to do it. So what we had to do, especially in the first year, we had to ask again and again and again our neighbors, because we had no idea about life. And this was exhausting, especially after 10 years of being a pastor, where I was kind of in a leadership position. And then we stepped back to this learning position. And it was exhausting, but it was great. And it was confusing for the people, because usually white people, especially white people from the West, they come in, they do their programs, they know exactly, they know exactly what people need, and then they disappear again, or they live outside somewhere from the urban poor communities. They come in, do their programs, and go out again. So what we did, or what we are doing, we just live there and we learn, and that's confusing in a very good way. And so the first year, the only thing we did was survive and learning language and culture and get to know people. This was the first year. And looking back, I would say this was tough, because especially Swiss people, they always ask you, what are you doing there? So it's all about doing. And it's a bit difficult to explain that we are actually not doing a lot. We are just being. And that's already ministry, to be with the people. And I love to say, actually, God made us as human beings and not human doings. So I think it's fine to be, but we are not used to that. And then, so that's kind of a role. And that's the idea of servants. First year, you don't start any kind of ministry. It's okay to join a ministry of your team members, but don't start something else. Don't give money, because that's a big thing. When Westerners come in, they have money. Obviously, we have more money than our friends, but we always said, no, sorry, we are not allowed to give money in our first year. That's very helpful. Because if not, you just start to distribute money because you see all the needs and you want to help. So, and you
create an imbalance there through that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, what we really long to is to don't have this normal gap that often just happen if Westerners are together. I think that's whole topic about white supremacy. You already have this, it's not balanced somehow. And the way we behave makes it even worse. So with this attitude of I'm a learner, we try to find a balance and to be like the same a little bit. Or even saying, hey, you're the expert, please show me. Please explain me. Yeah. So, and then after this first,
what strikes me about that is, you talk about the power imbalance, and that anybody from the West who's coming in instinctively. And I think this is one of my struggles of mission that we've done in the past, is trying to bring not just our faith, but our culture, and to make other cultures look like ours. But you're saying that is exactly the opposite intentionally of what you're trying to do. You're learning their culture and to live in their culture.
Yeah. Yes, that's what we are trying to do. But I was a bit naive. I thought when I came here, I mean, actually, honestly, and that's embarrassing, I did not even know the term white supremacy, because maybe, Thomas, you will understand, as a Swiss, you think there's no problem about black and white. There is no problem about power dynamics because we are the Swiss and we're so nice and we're so neutral and we don't have any kind of these problems. I had really no idea about it. Yeah, and we were not, we didn't colonize countries. We are just the nice people in the world, and we don't have any problem. That's really bad. So that's well. So we came here. I had no idea. I was aware that we have to be very careful about, do we bring the gospel or do we bring just our Western culture? And I was aware that sharing the gospel needs, you really have to know the culture and you have to kind of translate it to the culture. I was aware of that, but I was not aware at all about power dynamics for quite a long time. And then we have one team member. He's from the States. He's a Filipino American. And he really opened my eyes. He shared about growing up as a non-white American, Filipino American in California. And he shared he shared about his life and what he sees in the Philippines. And this was very painful. First, I said, that's not about me because I'm Swiss. It's not about me. And more I realized, oh, I'm part of it. I'm part of this history. And I'm part of a society with this historical background. And yes, I'm white and I'm privileged, and we have to be aware of that. And I don't have an answer. I don't know how to do it best, but I just have a sense of how to do it a bit better than I think we did it for hundreds of years in mission. But yeah, it is a problem, and we really have to be aware of that. In very small things. And I mean, whenever we will ask Filipinos, they will not say, oh, I don't want to do that or this, just because we are the Westerners. And you really have to be aware of this power dynamics. It's so easy. I think it's very easy for Westerners to go somewhere and then you have a huge church event and then you tell people, or you invite people to give their life to Jesus and to stand. If you want to start to be a believer, just stand up. Everyone will stand up just because you're white from the West. And it's important to be aware of that. It's so easy then to say, oh, it was such a successful outreach. All people stood up and gave their life to Jesus, but that has nothing to do with gospel. It has nothing to do with faith. It has just to do with power dynamics. And that's really a problem. So how can we do it better? It's a huge question. And one try is we just live there and we try to become friends and part of it. And of course, pandemic helped because we had a very, very strict lockdown and a very long lockdown and a crazy lockdown. For example, school were closed until last November, so November 2022. This was our ministry now today is about education because of that. So it was really crazy, and lots of private schools are still closed and just online. Kids were not allowed to go officially outside the house for maybe 1.5 years. So it was really, really crazy. And we had soldiers outside of the street. We had lots of checkpoints. It was not possible to leave the city for many, many weeks or even months. We were not even able to reach each other as a team because we live in walking distance, but during lockdown, there were checkpoints in between. So we had to meet at the checkpoints. So it was really crazy. That's what I want to say. It was really a very hard lockdown. And what people saw and said to us, you stayed. You had the chance to leave the country, but you stayed. And yeah, we decided to stay in our house, and we were just like everyone else. We were just waiting what will happen. And this makes a difference because lots of missionaries, and not to say that it was wrong that they left, but lots of missionaries, lots of Western, they left the country, and we stayed. And just that's about just being there, waiting until it's going by, and just being there. That's also mission, I think. That's also yeah. And then the whole school topic, when school still closed and you have kids, we were kind of sitting in the same boat. We've suddenly had the problem that our kids were at home all the time, and we had to teach them. And this is such a burden. I mean, you had homeschooling too, I think, during pandemic. It's really no fun. And it was so overwhelming. And then as a mom or as parents, we were just really sitting in the same boat. We were suffering and struggling, and we got angry about us and our boys the same as our Filipino neighbors. And this helps to have this balance. And that's what people said. You stayed and you're going through the same things as we do. Yeah. I think that's just a possibility. Yeah.
So when you say sharing the gospel, what do you mean? I was recently having a conversation with our mission coworkers. A lot of our work is in particular in the South Sudan. And so having conversations with some of our mission coworkers in the South Sudan, what does it mean to share the gospel? And I think because in our minds, and one of the reasons that we wanted to talk about this is because, evangelism in America in the 50s, when this church started, was pretty much about going and knocking on doors and telling people where the church was, and then they would come to church. Well, when mission in the 50s and 60s, in large parts was about going and into maybe remote areas and telling people who may not have heard or who hadn't heard in a long time, the community where we are in South Sudan, in the Marker village, they had heard about Jesus a long time ago, but then they, fell away or whatever, however you want to say that. And then in the 70s, we carried the good news to them again. What is the good news? What are we doing? What is when you say sharing the gospel, what does that mean?
Yeah. So maybe first of all, I have to say I'm deeply convinced that we do not have to bring. That's sometimes people think this. We don't bring Jesus to the poor areas. That's really not what we are doing, because I'm so convinced God is already there. If God is somewhere, then He is with the poor. I mean, just read the gospel, what Jesus did. If God created the world and He is in everything and everywhere, and there is no corner in the world where there is no God, that's just what I'm convinced about. So what I'm doing, when I move into an urban poor community, I try to find God, not to bring God. I would like to find, and I want to see what God is already doing here, and then kind of if it works well, I can just jump on the ministry He's already doing. He already started, and I can somehow contribute that it's going on or that something can happen. So that, and I think this makes a difference, to have this attitude of God is already there. I don't bring God. I mean, who am I? I'm not a perfect Christian to bring God. Really not. So, and now the Philippines is a special setting. So all over the Philippines, in our community, we just have in walking distance so many churches. So it's crowded with Catholic churches and lots of evangelical churches, many founded by American missionaries. So in the Philippines, Servants does not do any kind of church planting, because honestly, there are already enough churches. We don't need church planting. Or it doesn't make sense to just open another church. So that's not what we are doing. We try to get to know people, and then along that these people can just journey with God. That's very simple. And in a specific way, for example, we have a mothers group. So once a month we meet, some women and mothers, we gather together. It was not because of me. They just start to gather and I just joined. I was always longing to have a kind of a mothers group here, but I had no idea how to start, knowing that if I say, let's meet, they will all come. But that's kind of the wrong motivation. So I waited and waited and waited. And then suddenly they started to gather themselves and I was invited to join. So there's a place where we share. Everyone is sharing and lots of crying and lots of laughter. And then we pray and we read the Bible together, which is very easy in the Philippines, as kind of everyone is. If you're not a Muslim from the South, you're anyway kind of Christian. I mean, everyone is a Christian. I've never met a person saying I'm not a Christian. So it's easy to read the Bible. That's probably different from other countries. And then we read the Bible, and what we try to encourage people as servants is to be honest. For example, it's okay to say, oh, I do not understand this Bible text. I don't understand why God is doing this or this in my life. And then I see my job to say, hey, that's okay. Very often we don't understand. So not to bring the right answers, because that's what happened in the Philippines for many, many years. So you have the pastor giving the right answers and explanations, and people just have to believe. And I prefer to say, yeah, we are just followers of Christ, and some things we understand in life and in the Bible. And there are many things we don't. And it's okay. God is with us in all these questions. So to relax, I think my mission is to relax, because lots of people are not so relaxed when it comes about faith, because it's this kind of pressure, especially in the evangelical churches, this pressure of you have to come to church every Sunday, you have to read the Bible every day, you have to pray every day, like all the things you described that happened in the past. We see this until today. So lots of pressure, and as servants, we long to tell the people, hey, it's okay, relax. God is very nice, and he's here with you every day, not just on Sunday in the church. And then I personally don't care so much about where do these people go to church on Sunday. For me, it's much more being together with them during the week and in our groups and wherever we meet them. And that it's holy. For me, faith is so holistic. So God is here every day. I mean, when we go to the market, he's here. And when we go to school, he's here. And whatever, it's not just on Sunday morning. Often people have in mind God is just in the church. And we try to say, no, God is here every day in your struggles and your celebrations. Yeah. So if you ask, where do you share life? And where do you share faith, the gospel? This women's group we have, that's a very clear setting of sharing faith together and the gospel. But I'm not preaching there. I'm just part of the group. Mm-hmm. And then our main ministry is literacy, because schools were closed and they had to learn, kids had to learn at home. So it was not even online because most people did not have internet. So they just got the books from the school and some instructions. And then the parents were responsible that the kids do their things, which of course didn't work at all, because there were many, either the parents had to work or they dropped out of school. They maybe can hardly read and write. And the materials were so overwhelming, far too difficult. So it was not possible. So kids did not learn for 2.5 years, many, many kids. And a friend of us, a Filipina friend, she said she would like to start a kind of tutorial, a small group with 3 times a week teaching kids. And she asked us to help. So we did. And that's maybe very typical. So someone came to us and asked us, would you like to help me in doing this? It was not our idea to start a tutorial. They asked us and we joined. And after a few months, we realized this tutorial does not work because the kids don't learn. We tried to go through these materials from school and it didn't work at all. So they did not know the numbers, not the numbers they knew, but the letters, and far away from being able to read. So then we thought maybe we should change something. And another friend, she's very, very, very well into education. She introduced us to another approach, how to learn read and writing. And we found some materials for free on the internet, and it was all about one-on-one teaching instead of teaching a group. And then we said, together with our friends, we said, let's try if this works better in teaching kids. And so we started, my husband and I, we just started to meet, to go every day to these kids at home. We met them at home and we read with them with these new materials for 15 minutes only. So 15 minutes one-on-one. And it was amazing to see the progress. So then we said, maybe that's something. That's because we realized they won't learn during this pandemic a lot. Okay, we can't change this. We can't change the education system, but they really should learn how to read and write. That's the key for their education, for their whole life. Mm-hmm. So we did this with 5 kids every day, going there, teaching them 15 minutes one-on-one. But it was obvious that's maybe not the best idea that foreigners teach Tagalog. I mean, that's just crazy. And anyway, we plan to go
teach
on
accents,
further.
right?
Yeah, no, it was terrible. I mean, there are sounds I can hardly, like, they are so similar to me. How can I teach them to teach? So anyway, we needed local people to teach the kids, which is much, much better. And then again, our friend, she asked women in the community, just ordinary women like moms, and not teachers, they are all not teachers, but she asked some women if they would like to start with us this ministry and go to kids regularly, daily, and read with them. And so it went on, and they found new women who also wanted to teach. And today we have, I think it's 6 women who visit daily, around each 6 to 8 kids to read about 15-20 minutes. And it's just about, they go there, they read with the kids, and the progress is great. We will soon have another graduation where kids can read and write. And now you can say, is this really mission? And I understand. I mean, that's really a good question. Is this about mission? That's just social working or something, and that's education. And I think it's good to ask this question. But I personally think, yes, Jesus told me to love my neighbors. And these families are my neighbors, literally. They are my neighbors. And loving my neighbors and these families, for me, in this season of pandemic, also means that to help them in this struggling, in this challenge of teaching their kids. And the government did not help them, so maybe we can help them. I mean, it's just about love. For me, mission is all about love. The gospel is about love. It's not about pressure or tell the people that they will go to hell if they now don't believe in Christ. It's so much about love and sharing God's love. Mm-hmm. And what we see is, I mean, we had our main goal was that kids can learn, read, and write. But what we see today is it's so much more about relationship. These kids feel so much loved by their teachers. It's so the kids get so close to their teachers. The families, they share with us that they feel so much seen because we help them with education. The teachers say, it's so great. I feel so much more confident. And my life changed so much since I started to teach. So their self-esteem went up because we told them, you're able to teach. We think you will be a good teacher. So it's so much more than about ABC. It's about relationship, and it's about love, and it's about I see and hear you. And I think that's the gospel, because Jesus was so good in seeing people and responding to needs of people. Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by that, and by that image of the mission as a God-finding mission. That is really I love that. And also what you're saying about don't be the first to start, but see where something is already happening. I have a really good friend, Lloyd. He is a doctor here in the US, and he's from Manila. And what he keeps telling me is that, of course, the history of colonialization, but he says we Philippines have a special problem that we've always absorbed the foreign culture. First the Spanish, and then the American, and like in a really self-emptying way. And what I hear you doing is really that empowering. You're that empowering person there. Says you can do this. This is of value, and you see strength and beauty and with the patience and allow for honesty, and I'm really intrigued. Yeah.
I think I mean, when we came here, we really tried to have no idea about what we will do, but of course you have some ideas in mind when you go abroad. I was very clear that I don't want to homeschool my own boys. That was one thing. Another thing was I don't want to be involved in any kind of kids ministry, as we have some 2 kids. And So, and now we ended up with homeschooling our kids because of the pandemic. And I really end up in education and kids ministry. And maybe that's for me it's so funny. And that's how God is working. That I think if you're open to whatever God wants you to do, then it will be fine. Because today I say it's fine. This homeschooling is fine. I'm happy that it's over soon, but it was okay and it is okay. And also this kids ministry, this education ministry, this is really okay because I feel that's what God wanted us to do. And it was not our plan. It really somehow it just happened. It really just happened. And then we saw, now it's the time to do this. It felt so right together to start this together with Filipina friends. And that's kind of holy when things just happen, not because we had this great idea, because you realize it's now the time to do this. And during the pandemic, during the first weeks of pandemic, I often thought, God, what are we doing here? I mean, we came here to change something, and now I'm stuck in my little house. I'm not even allowed to go out. Well, I felt like everything is dying. Not knowing if even the neighbors will die, literally. I mean, we didn't know what will happen with COVID. Mm-hmm. And what I learned here is that God can always bring new life and start new things, even during a pandemic. And I see so many flowers blooming, coming out of this kind of difficult situation of pandemic, this feeling of everything will die. And looking back, I could say, lots of things died. I mean, we had ideas in mind, everything we had to let die. And then new things were able to grow. And that's God. I mean, that's not man-made. That's really God-made things. Mm-hmm. And that's amazing to me. That, Do you understand what I mean? It's just amazing what God is doing if kind of we let him do and be a bit. I think one thing we Westerners are doing is we are far too quick. We just do and we think we know what to do. And there is it's a high value of just waiting. And the pandemic made us wait. I mean, we had to stop everything. And then there was space for new things, better things maybe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful as well, and we'll carry this. I keep thinking, how, because in a sense, I've learned from Thomas and from my husband, who I shared is from Northern Ireland. One day I was asking my husband, Steve, I was like, Steve, I really feel called to go and be a missionary, and I think I need to go. And he looked at me and he said, I am a missionary. Because he's originally from Northern Ireland. He said, I don't understand what you mean. I am far from my place of origin, and I am here, to share my faith and share my life. Yeah. And I think maybe we don't need to go quite so far. Yeah. But maybe we could take a spirit of humility in saying, maybe our role is to trust that whatever God is doing, whatever we uncover, is what God is already doing there. I love that, that we're not, it is not up to me to bring the gospel. Rather, it is up to me and the people in partnership to identify together where God is moving in the community, because God is doing something. And I may not see it by myself, and they may not see it by themselves. But maybe we have more to learn. Yeah. So thank you so much. I love that. I love that.
I think it's at the end of the day, it's quite simple. So God told us to love him and to love the people. And so let's just love the people and God, and wherever you are. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in the States at home, or if you're in Europe, or if you're in Asia. And it's just loving each other, isn't it? And ourselves. I think it's kind of simple. Sharing life and sharing love and listening to God and be open to his plans.
I want to say,
I don't want to say don't come to Asia. I think if there are people who want to join servants, please come. I think it doesn't make you a better Christian if you're you don't have to spend some weeks of your life in a short-term mission field trip just to be a better Christian. It's not necessary. You can just stay where you are and share the gospel. Yeah.
I think there's something inside of us that keeps thinking that loving God and loving our neighbor is much more complicated than
it's not enough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what is so beautiful about what you've shared. I remember when I was I was thinking about going into ministry, and at the time specializing with children and youth ministry. And my mentor, she had a moment, and she said, I can't keep doing this anymore. I need to be a human being. And all I am right now is a human doing. And I don't have anything left. I don't know how to be. And so she did. She stepped back from her formal ministry, and she started just being with herself, with other people. And I think there's a beauty to that, so I love that. I love that.
Yeah. I think this value about being, that's something that's really against our Western values, and so maybe that's what God wants us to do first. Just learn how to do it instead of doing.
Mm-hmm. So my next question, Barbara, is when will you come to the United States? When will you come see us? You need to come preach with us on a Sunday and be with us.
I will let you know. First, we have to go back to Switzerland and try to go back into a Swiss life. We're a bit scared about that. It's a bit different. But I would love to come to Nebraska. Now that I know where Nebraska is, that's another embarrassing thing. I had no idea about Nebraska. I was a bit, I felt ashamed when I had the map in front of me, and I thought, oh, okay, there's Nebraska. I had I'm not very good in American geography.
It's somewhere in the middle in what we call flyover country. So even when you land at the airport in Omaha, it says there's a sign, and it says something like "not just flyover country," because very few people take the time to stop in the best part of the world. So the best part of the country, I think, anyway. Maybe not the world. There's lots of good places, but yeah.
So thanks. I would love to come and visit you. Really.
Please do that. Yeah, I would love that. Yeah. All right. And you're gonna be, at least time zone wise, a little bit closer to us.
Yeah.
Beginning in 6 weeks or so. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, blessings on you and this transition coming up, and on the love that you have shared, on the life that you have shared in amongst the urban poor in the slums. Now we have now we know what that means. So thank you for all of that, and answering that call to ministry where in the Philippines. Thanks for helping to uncover what God is doing.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening and talking together. It was exciting.
Appreciate that. Awesome. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sunrise Road podcast. Our podcast is hosted by me, Thomas Dimmermuth.
And me, Melody Jones Poynton. And it is edited by Vince Rule.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a ministry of Eastridge Presbyterian Church. Please like and subscribe. And